here. Welcome, folks. We'll be getting started in a few minutes. I want to give folks time to join us. But if you could fill out that poll as you log in, that's always appreciated. Welcome to tonight's program. We're right at 7, so I know people are logging in.
Getting cozy.
Hopefully. It's a little bit cold out today. It's kind of it's starting to turn to winter, definitely.
It's official. I think I just got the mail today. That's the only contact I had with the outdoors.
Right. It looks like more folks are joining us on YouTube this evening than Zoom, which is pretty cool. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I know there's a bit of a lag on Zoom, but we're really appreciative that you're here. My name is Annie Tillman. I'm the Adult Program Coordinator at the Schaumburg Library. Tonight we've got Melissa Riddle from Honest Living joining us today to talk about decorating your home. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put those into the Q&A box or use the chat function. We'll address those at the end of the program. And because we have so many folks joining us on YouTube this evening, you can go ahead and use the chat on there as well. And I'll make sure to monitor both places so that we can answer all of your questions. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Melissa and we'll get this evening started.
Thanks so much, Annie. Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for joining me tonight and giving me a reason to put on makeup after 6 p.m. It's kind of a rare thing these days, so I appreciate that. Life has been challenging on a lot of levels for everyone, and I know that our spaces factor into that quite a bit, and we're requiring more of them than ever before. So tonight I wanted to, and hopefully will, give you some insight on how to reimagine your own spaces using strategies and design principles that I run every day in my practice. I'll plan to discuss with you what I plan to discuss with you applies to nearly every design style, perhaps not extreme ones like, super minimalist or maximalist interiors, but should be a good foundation for how most of us live. So I'll just jump right in and ask the question that probably brought most of you here tonight. Annie, if you want to hit the next slide. So you want to redecorate. I'm just gonna real quick make sure that, yeah, there we are. When I'm first starting out, either with a client or even with a project of my own, I like to get my hands on the answers to kind of these first 4 lines of inquiry. I want to list my goals so that I know what it is about the room that I want to change. Is it just a style thing that you're looking to update? Or is it something more functional? Then you want to find some inspiration, think about your budget, and then start to think about resources for how you're going to complete this design. You can go to the next slide. And Annie, since I can't see if you've gone, will you just say next or something like that to let me know that we've progressed?
We're on the next one.
Thank you. So breaking those questions down further, I wanted to get into goals and functions. So it's important to understand why you've decided to take on a redecorating project. Again, did you not like the style? Is it just time for an update? That happens. How do you use the space? Does it function well currently, or does it need to be adapted for additional uses? what are ways its performance itself could be improved? Is it too light or too dark? Not private enough? Does the floor plan flow? Or do you have, obstacles to getting from your front door to your dining room, for instance? Identifying the obstacles to performance are what's going to inform how you progress with your design plan. So you might not be thinking about that all the time. Maybe you are, but it's good to kind of hit the reset button once you've decided to start a project. And at that point, just make a list of the things that you hope to correct through a process of design. And once you've decided on that, then you want to pay some attention to the aesthetic direction. And usually we try to find some inspiration for that. So research and explore visuals, listed a few different places that you can do that here. Most of us know, where to find visual information that is appealing to us. I do try to encourage my clients to look at spaces that are similar to theirs. It's not common that our aesthetic inclinations line up precisely with the homes that we're living in. And it's going to be a lot more helpful to you if you can think about, or rather look at spaces that are similar to yours. If you live in a ranch style home, looking at ranch style home designs, condos and such, apartment design is just going to help you narrow the scope of inspiration so that you can apply it to your specific project. I also think if you're organizing images or you're just responding to different visual information you find appealing, to really think about and organize them thematically according to what it is that you find appealing about them. Is it the way that the light is in the space, the quality of the light? Is it how it's styled? Is it the furniture? All of those are really important things to think about when you're looking at inspiration, to try to define what it is about that inspiration that you might want to incorporate. The other thing I caution my clients about looking on social media is just paying too much attention to trends. Of course, trends are a natural part of the landscape and are fun to experiment with, but try to, at least steer toward things that you can do in a more temporary application. I'm obsessed with all things terrazzo and love the idea of, a whole bathroom wall of terrazzo, but my 1913 cottage in Oak Park isn't going to probably accommodate that very much. So I'll stick to coasters and the like. Once you're you got a grasp on inspiration, you might want to start thinking about budget. What are your big ticket items? Do you want to, I'm talking largely about decoration, furniture, living spaces, and things like that right now, and not necessarily remodeling projects, but what is going to be the bulk of your expenses? If you're looking at a sofa online, you're going to have additional costs like tax and delivery. If you are looking at drapery, you have to consider drapery hardware and or drapery rings, tie backs, anything like that. So I always think about your big number and then take 15 to 20% of that to allocate toward indirect costs like installation. Even those are the kinds of things that you want to think about. And finally, where do you plan to shop for these items? There are so many options. So narrowing down your scope with that can help with what I like to call the problem of choice. Lots of other people probably like to call it that too. But basically, when the whole world is available to you, it's nice to put some parameters around things. So thinking about where you want to shop can kind of help with that. We're pretty adept now at online shopping, although it has its downsides when it comes to furniture and other larger design elements. For me personally, it's important how something feels, the tactile quality of it. And that, of course, is something that you can't really do, particularly with online only resources. Although they will often send you samples, and a lot of them have really generous return policies. So in the event that, something doesn't live up to your expectation, online only retailers tend to be pretty flexible about that kind of thing. So don't be afraid of them. But I do think they're more ideal for lighting, case goods like storage furniture, tables, just things that are slightly easier to predict what the outcome is going to be. And then, retail, we're all familiar with just going into a store to buy something. And I think that's probably the safest bet with most of your larger upholstered pieces and area rugs. Again, just because how something feels and sits is so integral to your enjoyment of that. And of course, it can be relative to how often you expect to use that piece. If you're buying a sofa for your second bedroom, that might also be a sleeper or something like that. Not that we don't want our guests to be comfortable, but based on use alone, it might not be worth all of the trouble to go through to try to find, the absolute perfect thing. So going with something that has a little bit more potential variability works just fine. Um, Shopping in stores these days too is really great because I've noticed a lot of them have associates now that have some design training, and that can be really helpful, especially within a certain store, to understand the full realm of furniture options available to you. If you're looking for performance fabrics because you have pets, kids, things like that, or let's say you sit on a sofa and it doesn't feel as comfortable to you as you might want, there could be options for other sort of fill types for those cushions that you will only know through talking to somebody that works there. So don't just assume when sit on something in a place like Bob Williams Mitchell Gold or Room and Board or something like that, that there aren't other custom options that could enhance your experience of that piece. And then one that's near and dear to my heart in terms of sourcing is vintage. Almost everything in my house is vintage. I used to work for an auction house. And it's something that in my practice, I've really encouraged people to kind of step out of their comfort zones and consider the auction world. It's definitely a particularly good resource, I think, for artwork. A lot of my clients will have a hard time finding art that they really enjoy that maybe isn't contemporary art. Contemporary art can also be extremely expensive. So looking at regional art being sold through an auction can be a great way to get something that has that authentic feel that isn't, a mass produced piece of art, but, maybe at a more accessible level. Always, talk to specialists beforehand. Here in Oak Park, we have Toomey. I know there are some auction houses on the north side of Chicago as well. So get familiar with those. I think it's an untapped resource for a lot of people, and can even, for those pieces that you just maybe want to hunt for, that you don't, you can buy your sofa at a store and other, but maybe you want something that has a little bit more of a story or interest or soul to it, you can often find in an auction house. And lastly, of course, if you're working with a designer, we have trade-only resources that can be really great. So let's say you want something that maybe is just a little bit more unique. We have places that only sell to interior designers. So for accessories and things like that, partnering with a designer, at some level can be really helpful. And now that we have all of this, kind of legwork done, if you want to go to the next slide, Annie, I wanted to suggest to you a project organization tool that I use in my practice that's free online. It's called Trello. Not sure how many people are watching and or know about this particular web-based project management system, but it's terrific. It's kind of like if Pinterest and a spreadsheet, got together, and it's really a visual tool that you can organize each room element that you're looking to adjust, even ones that you're not, just so you can keep a reference to the things that maybe you decided to keep for the room. If you want to hold on to your existing furniture, you can have a column that's dedicated to the pieces that you want to utilize. Maybe you have some things that you've never quite known how to incorporate. Putting images of those things in this tool can help you keep them at the front of your mind when you're maybe selecting a sofa fabric or drapery, and to not have to have a bunch of different resources, some pictures on your phone, something that you printed out, something in a magazine. It can all go into this one place. And one of my favorite features about it is that when you hit the share button online, you can hook up your phone to have Trello be one of those locations that you can share to. So even if you're just screen grabbing through Instagram or something like that, you can immediately link it to this resource and then have it to look back instead of it just kind of getting lost in all of the other images that we all have on our phones. So now that you've kind of got all of this, you're thinking about your budget, floor plan, aesthetics. Now we might want to think about what we actually want this room to look like. So if you want to go to the next slide. The next thing that I would do is think about my focal point. The first time I walk into any room, empty or furnished, I ask myself, what is the focal point of this space? All of a room's necessary elements should work together to draw the viewer's eye to a specific focal point. And this is a great place to start if you walk into your room and you're just not sure, even begin. Ask yourself, what is my focal point? And that can start to inform where the design will go, in addition to any functional changes that you're looking to modify. These can be natural or architectural features of your space. Sometimes you have to invent a focal point. Maybe, this, in the example shown, there's the fireplace. In the middle, you have a headboard wall. Maybe that room wasn't as architecturally, interesting. Maybe there were multiple places that you could put the bed, but they've decided to create this dynamic, wallpaper feature, put the bed in front of it. And there's no doubt where you're supposed to look when you walk into that space. And also, in a living room, your TV wall tends to be kind of the natural focal point of the space, unless you hide your TV, but that can be the media wall focal point there. So I will also say that there tends to be, larger sort of open plan homes, there's not just one focal point in a space, you can have multiple focal points. So the important thing is that when you do have multiple ones, that they all work together in balance, and balance is something that we will talk about shortly. If you want to go to the next slide. The next thing I wanted to review is some tools to define that focal point. So if you've made a decision that it's going to be the wall that you put your TV on, if you made a decision that it's going to be your headboard wall, or in the case of a bathroom remodel, maybe it's, your vanity or something like that. The easiest and least expensive ways to really enhance that moment are listed here for you on the left. You can see in the marketplace now, there are lots of different temporary options. Some of those I really like. Some of those, maybe might not be the best for your living room, and maybe for a different type of space, but they're fun to play with, and anything temporary allows you to explore different options. So definitely worth checking out. Retail drapery and window coverings, these are all things that are available at a really wide range of price points, and can add a lot of impact to your space. If you're looking more to kind of invest in your home or the value of your home, I definitely suggest looking into some of these other wallpaper. It's not just material costs, it's installation costs. So I consider it one of the more expensive treatments that you can do to enhance a focal point. Custom window coverings, of course. I've often bought retail drapery and then had it amended and some modified in some way in order to get more of a custom look from that. It's definitely something worth checking out. If, let's say, you do have really tall windows, it's hard to get standard drapery longer than 120 inches. You can always add fabric to the bottom or top to get what you need out of it at a price point that works best for you. millwork and casework, shelving around fireplaces, things like that can always kind of just serve to increase the impact of your focal point, but also reduce the amount of furniture that you have in a space, which if it's a smaller space, combining furniture into some of your architectural elements can open things up a little bit. And furniture is, expensive no matter what. So if you want to keep your existing furniture, there are things that you can do to, make that work better with what you have, or you can look into new options, obviously. But one of my favorite, least expensive and most high impact ways to add value and visual impact to your space is with paint. And Annie, if you'd go to the next slide, I'd love to talk to you about paint. I could do a whole presentation on paint alone, and I'll try not to talk too long about paint in this setting, but it is such a, it's just a great tool to bring dynamics and interest to a space, and with relatively, low amount of labor and investment. But there's a lot that you want to consider when you decide to paint. And I wanted to go through some of them here with you. So value, saturation, LRV, which is your light reflecting value, and sheen. Those are kind of your four big hitters when you're talking about painting. Your eye follows difference. And one of these forms of difference is value contrast, the difference between light and dark. And that is a tool that I use a lot in my own work, but I think is relevant to literally every space. Having a range of value contrast is going to create the most interesting spaces to look at and live in. And paint is a great way to get that. So light and dark, value contrast. You also want to consider saturation. Saturation refers to how vivid or rich or intense a color is. If you're painting with a non-neutral color, which is kind of what I refer to, anything that's not a beige or a gray or a white, getting just the right saturation can be really challenging. Generally speaking, personally, I tend to reserve bold saturated color for spaces you transition through rather than ones you occupy for long periods of time. I prefer to explore color through art and drapery, accent furniture, things that you can update in a shorter amount of time than maybe you want to repaint. But there are cases where it's certainly exactly what is needed. Powder rooms, entry, dining spaces, children's rooms offer a really good opportunity to play with vibrant color. Lots of people like to paint ceilings these days. I think you have to be very careful about the reflection of that color. For instance, you decide to paint your ceiling red, and your walls are white, your walls will become pink the closer to the color that your wall gets. So at the top, you're going to get a lot of heavy reflection down into the space that changes the wall color. So it's tricky and you kind of have to be careful with it, but it can be fun. Next is light reflecting value, LRV. Every paint is given an LRV number, which ranges from about 90 at the lightest to 5 or so at the darkest. The higher the LRV, the more light is reflected by that color. It gets irritatingly scientific, but I try to think of it more as a predictor of the outcome you're looking for. So if you want a light, bright space, but maybe not a white room, you want to look at the LRV. If it's 60 or lower, you're venturing into midtones and are probably not going to get the look you want, even if it appears light in the sample. So that's where, especially if you don't have a larger sample of it, relying on the LRV is going to be helpful. It's also good to use if you're painting multiple colors in a single space and you want them to have a significant difference. LRV is a fixed metric that you can use to predict some of that. So if you're looking at two samples that seem different when they're right in front of you, and you look at their LRV, maybe they're closer like 60 and 70, and you want more contrast between them than that. You want to increase that LRV, go a little bit lower with one and higher with another. LRV and sheen work hand in hand. Sheen is the amount of light reflected as a result of the paint's surface, not its color. Most paint manufacturers offer a broad range of sheens these days, and I'll go through them quickly here for you. So flat is always the lowest sheen. Only use flat on ceilings. And I do recommend going with, if you're painting a ceiling, an actual ceiling paint versus just a flat of a regular interior latex paint. So ceiling paints just have a thicker viscosity. They hold on better. They splatter less. Just it's good. It's good to go with that product for ceilings. The next is typically matte. A lot of the mid to higher range paint companies offer a matte finish now, which is what I use on walls almost exclusively. It's a little bit more durable once it's cured than a flat, which you would never use on the walls because it's just not washable at all. But a durable matte is a good option. And then once you get past that, you're at eggshell, probably what most people are familiar with, durable enough for most areas of the home. My issue with eggshell and why I tend to choose matte over eggshell is that eggshells sheen visibility changes depending on the angle that you're looking at it. So I just like to have more control over it. If I want to see a sheen, I'll pick a paint that always has that sheen. And if I want it to be matte, I'll pick a sheen that is always matte. So that's kind of my issue with eggshell. But it's, it's great for certain settings. The other issue with higher sheen paints is that they don't touch up as well. So you might feel like you wouldn't want to do like a matte sheen in a staircase, let's say. But if you're carrying something up that staircase and you happen to gouge it and you have to patch that area, you're less likely to have to repaint the entire area if you have a matte sheen versus an eggshell or higher sheen than eggshell. Then you get into some of the higher sheens, like pearl and satin. It's kind of the next step above eggshell. That's my go-to for trim. I do like when there's a perceivable difference between your drywall surfaces and your painted wood surfaces. The brain just likes it better when, it doesn't all read like the same surface material. If you have drywall and wood next to each other, then they should read a little bit differently, but it doesn't have to be a big jump. Semi-gloss and gloss, I rarely specify. Semi can be a good trim option in homes that are newer. So it's the first time the trim is being painted. If it's been painted multiple times, the higher the sheen, the more you're going to see those old brush strokes or old paint losses and things like that. So like I said, lower the sheen, the sort of less it reveals about the surface underneath. And so I kind of stick in that mid-range. But that's my personal preference and what I recommend. My last couple of notes on paint, and if you want to go to the next slide, are really about sampling. If you take nothing else away tonight, it should be that you should always test your paint samples next to your trim and never in the middle of a wall. The photo on the left shows what most people have done prior to calling me for a color consult because they can't pick a paint because all of their samples are in the middle of the wall. You will never know the true nature of a paint color if it's sampled adjacent to a color that you're painting over. You always want to see it next to what's staying in the room. If you don't have trim, you can paint up to your baseboard, but better than painting with one of the small cans that you can get from your paint store is like the image on the right, is to get these large cards of paint. They tend to be the truest representation of multiple layers of paint or coats and just have the truest nature of the paint that you, or the paint color that you intend to use. So popping those up next to your trim is really helpful. Again, I could talk about paint ad nauseum, but there are different exposures, and if you're trying to paint a single house color, you really want to be able to go from room to room and see how that paint behaves in all of the different light scenarios that you might find it in. So having that on paper is going to be a lot easier, especially if you can get a hold of multiples, than trying to go around and painting a bunch of samples throughout your house. And then the last note about paint is adjacent whites. And you could say this about adjacent grays too, but these two colors in particular really bring out kind of the, less nice aspects of each other when they're right next to each other. So even this sample on, or this example on the right, where she's holding up this slightly off-white to this bright white trim, it can really make, depending on which one is the creamier shade, your trim or your wall look dingy. So if you are going to paint your walls white and your trim white, I invite you to paint your walls the trim white, of course, in the proper sheen. But if you don't know, I really think it's worth it to paint your walls and your trim the same white. It's just, it will lead to a better outcome. So that's my tip on that. So far, this has all been pretty practical and hopefully useful information. Now I'm going to take a turn and maybe talk about some more conceptual aspects of design, but ones that I think are really necessary to a great room. Annie, if you want to go to the next slide. So tools for success. For me, in my view, as you're thinking about your focal point, you're working to guide your viewer toward where you want them to look. And it's important to consider these 5 elements when doing that, as they are the best tools that you can use to achieve that end. Of course, contrast, balance, reflection, light, and texture. Can have a very neutral space. And if you have all of these elements in it, it will be beautiful. If you want to go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about how these play into the overall look of your room. So it's a silly saying, but I've been using it my entire career because, I don't know, sandwiches. We all understand sandwiches, right? To achieve balance in a space, it needs to be anchored properly on both sides. And to me, that always brought to mind a sandwich. Good stuff in the middle, held together with hopefully evenly sized complementary elements. So that's why I always go to the design sandwich. You want to, sort of have that anchoring balance point on either side and good stuff in the middle. There are a number of strategies to achieve balance, and I'm highlighting several of them in this example here. And the room shown, the room divider balances the opposite window by mimicking its height and vertical rhythm. So you have this kind of tall, long element, which is an essential part of this room. And it could look really off balance if that was just a white wall there. But because we have this black framed window with this, vertical rhythmic element happening, they feel like they're part of a whole. The light color of the sofa's upholstery recedes into the wall, allowing the room divider to be the dominant element of contrast. But the scale of the sofa stands up to the scale of the room divider. So again, when you're looking at this image, you see that the sofa kind of carries the same visual weight as the room divider. And so through color and form, you're really keeping the balance of the space. Even the area rug with its low contrast, textured print, is mimicking the shape of the ceiling. And so you kind of have this, it's actually more rectangular, but in the orientation with the furniture, it kind of has that feeling of the top and the bottom kind of coming together. And so it really does articulate the idea too that, just because you don't have to have symmetry to have balance. It's really about proportion and rhythm and these kind of larger conceptual ideas that when you look at a room like this, you can see how they all play together. No one thing feels like it's overtaking the room, but you still feel like when you're looking at it, you know exactly what you're supposed to be viewing in the space. But of course, not everybody has such a dynamic, beautiful space to play with. So some of us will have to rely on other kinds of tricks in order to get this kind of result. Annie, if you want to go to the next one. And that's where we get into layering. These are some of my favorite things to play with in a space. And often when I'm getting called to a client's house, it's because they've done some level of redesign and they've gotten to 80% there and just don't know how to bring that last bit of layering to the space in order to make it feel like what their inspiration had or that they were going for. And layers really do bring the space to life. So one of the multiple ways to do this, and I'll just breeze through some of them here, but one of my favorites is having multiple light sources, having some ceiling lighting, sconces, table lamps, all different ways to modulate your lighting scenario will give you control over the mood, but also can help you again direct your eye to a focal point, but also just give the room a generally warm ambience. And that's kind of where light temperature and things like that come into play as well. I could do a whole talk on light temperature, but I really do think that warmer temperature lights really do bring that kind of mood and warmth to a space, and that's what I suggest for everyone. We'll say too, really nice to get your lighting onto an app or something like that. You don't have to have dimmers in every space, but having control over the volume of light can really, help if you're working on a task or you're just, want a particular mood. Makes it really easy just to open up an app on your phone and update that. And you can just buy bulbs that work that way. So another thing I recommend. Reflection is a big one for me. I love collecting mirrors. They just have that sparkle and can bring just a really significant, almost architectural impact to a space. If you've ever seen a room that has a large leaning mirror in it, almost acts as another window or doorway, or just something that makes a rather uninteresting perimeter of a room instantly more compelling. They also reflect these moments that we worked so hard to create, so you can kind of see them from different perspectives. Metallics do that, and mirrors do that as well. Texture is another big one. Just makes you aware. It reminds you that there are different surfaces going on in the space, and calls your attention to them in a way that you can manipulate in order to emphasize your focal point, or just make the whole experience of the room more interesting. Lastly, color, pattern, and rhythm. I referenced rhythm before. It's just a repetitive moment, like a grid of photos, or even a line of a wall of drapery, especially in a long space, having a place for your eye to stop and consider the vertical versus the long horizontal can really just address a space in a way that makes it just more interesting to look at. And I have to also talk about negative space. Can't, unless we are doing a maximalist interior, want to have places for the eye to stop and rest as well. Using these tools of drawing your eye in particular places can help you get your viewer to a place where their eye can rest and then take in another moment as well. And I'll have an example for you here in a moment of doing that. Transparency, opacity, all of those things, when I think about opacity, I think about weight. I think about, do you have a sofa that's on a higher leg? You might consider doing a side table or a coffee table that feels more opaque, more solid, just to anchor the room, and let that sort of lighter furniture in contrast, you'll notice it because of that difference. So that's one of the tricks that you can play with as well. So we'll move on to the next slide, which is just a stock photo that I pulled not too long ago, and just took some of the things that I've been talking about and applied it to this room in Photoshop. So on the left, you have, a pretty neutral space, attempts at, some light contrasting elements going on there. But overall, kind of supremely vanilla. And I didn't want to play with color so much. And I'm sticking in a range of gray tones, but you can see how just by shifting a few things, painting that column or volume in the back around the doors, just pulls you into the space and bringing some contrast up to the ceiling by changing out the dining room table fixture, changing the fixture over by, what's likely a powder room of sorts, to something that draws your eye up to the ceiling will make the space feel taller. Bringing some contrast into the window treatment. I changed subtly the color of the dining room chair just, to give them some more contrast with the table. And so you have this experience of really kind of 3 different zones in this space, and each one of them kind of has their own moment, but they all relate to each other. And of course, they all related to each other before too, because they were all sort of the same note. But I think the second image is more interesting and dynamic to look at. It was some rhythm in the grid of pictures behind the chairs. And the scale makes you less aware of this awkward shape of the wall that leads into the staircase. I also muted the ceiling color slightly too, which just kind of makes it feel not just so super reflective and super bright white, but just a little bit more layered and nuanced. So those are all, tried to pull as many of those recommendations into this example to kind of show you how they all work together. Then if you go to the next slide, Annie, there's kitchen and bath as well. All of these principles work in any space in your home. This is an example of a bathroom renovation I worked on. The client just kind of ran out of steam after a major home renovation, and we wanted to kind of get it across the finish line finally after a few years of living in it the way that they just kind of wrapped it up in the original renovation. And you can see the sort of use of shape, rounds offsetting the multitude of rectangles, following a circular theme into, a different, more of a projection into the space, and then creating that focal point with this lovely green high gloss tile. There were lots of mattes elsewhere in the room, so the gloss really just kind of helped to set that all apart and really make the space just a lot more fun and reflective of my homeowners. If you go to the next slide, this is just, a quick consultation that I did for how to update a kitchen without, completely redoing this kitchen, refacing the cabinets, updating the backsplash, using a few, points of strong contrast to draw the eye to the area of the kitchen that they really like, which is, the island, updating the lighting there to not only add more light to the space, because the existing pendants were not really doing a whole lot, and just giving that a more contemporary and bright and modern feel. So little things, just shifting a few little elements like painting the wood frame of the window black, kind of helps with that balance. It's almost a triangulation of the island to the backs, the accent backsplash on the hood to this window, and this feeling of, no one element being overly dominant, but still having an understanding of what is the most dynamic element or your focal point. This kind of backsplash over the range lighting moment. So go to the next slide. And those are kind of my final tips, just little anecdotes that I would leave you with. Of course, I've said it 100 times over the last 40 minutes. What is my focal point? You just always want to ask yourself that, and then try to use that as your foundation for all the other decisions you make for the space. Hang arts with 2 points of contact. It's more of a stability thing. I think if you can hang from a frame and have 2 points of contrast, then, or 2 points of contact rather, your photo on the wall will always be straight and level and never crooked. So it's great when you're doing a gallery wall to think about 2 points of contact. A little more effort for saving yourself a lifetime of going by and readjusting your frames, or having me come over to your house and readjusting them for you. Every room needs contrast. I don't care how monochromatic you want this space to be, or how lively with color. You've got to have those moments of dark saturation to really help draw your eye through, and take in all of the effort that you've put into it. Coordinate, don't match. I feel like when you try to match, you just diminish the specialness of whatever you're trying to coordinate with. So let's say there's an artwork that you love and you try to pull color from it. You're actually pulling attention from it, away from it. And so I encourage people to think about complementary colors versus colors that match. So let's say you have a beautiful landscape or something like that, with lots of green tones. Look for, some deep reds, or, even into oranges and things like that will serve to amplify that thing that you want people to notice, that you've chosen to highlight, versus taking away from it. And then lastly, give everybody a buddy. I mean, this should be like a rule for all things, but particularly in design, when let's say you inherit a walnut coffee table and you don't have walnut anywhere else in your house. It's just as simple as, I think maybe picking a different plane. So if it's on the floor, or following the plane of the floor, then find a surface to activate with walnut that's different. So maybe through a table lamp, or a framed art moment, or even objects. Like, just give it somebody to relate to, and you can pretty much do anything that you want. And it won't feel like it's something that's just the odd man out. So those are my top 5 tips. And if you want to go to the last slide, Annie, this is just my Instagram information if you decide you'd like to follow. I don't update my website that often. I'm not even that active on social media, to be honest, but I do have some cool projects coming up next year. If you want to follow how those come along, then that's where you'll find me. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box or Q&A. Again, I'm watching them on both YouTube and on Zoom. To get us started, I have one.
Okay.
The paint cards that you showed, is that something specific that you have to request, or where can you get something like that?
Sure. So, I'm mostly doing my paint specification through like Sherwin-Williams and Benjamin Moore. They definitely make larger samples. I think if you go through one of your local stores, they can sometimes order those for you. If you partner with a designer, obviously they can get them for you as well. But I think if you ask for them, you can generally get your hands on them. It just is. There are a couple, I think Sample Eyes is one of the companies that has come out recently too, that offers almost like a vinyl decal of a particular color. Those, have an expense, but honestly, what it saves you in time and energy is worth it. So at the very least, if you're not able to get them from your local stores, you can look into some of those online resources for them. And the colors do prove to be quite true. it's always risky to go outside of a vendor to get something that is supposed to be exactly what that vendor has. But I found that they've been pretty accurate.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mhm.
To see if we've got any questions. For folks that live in an apartment that can't paint, are there other ways that you recommend kind of changing up the walls or something like that?
Sure. I mean, I think there are a lot of temporary options that have come out on the market in the last few years in particular. Temporary wallpaper is one that's widely available in a lot of places. One vendor that I really like to work with a lot is Mitchell Black. They have a beautiful wallpaper line and a showroom here in Chicago as well. They offer different substrates, so you can get most any print that they have in traditional wallpaper or peel and stick, or they change it up depending on what it is that you require. But Anthropologie also has peel and stick wallpaper. They're widely available, and I think that there are creative ways to use them too. I rather like color blocking, so where you don't necessarily paint from corner to corner on a wall. I think there are some interesting opportunities with wallpaper there too. And I also think that there's some cool mural companies out there that do temporary murals. And these kind of decal things as well. My daughter's bedroom ceiling, she wanted her entire room pink. I said no, but I did paint her ceiling pink, and we got these lovely large peonies from a company called Urban Walls that weren't inexpensive, but certainly are dynamic and cool and scratched, that itch that she needed so desperately to scratch of having the girliest room ever. So, and helped me stay sane at the same time. And then when she's over that, they can come on down and no harm done.
We have a question that came in on YouTube. We might need a bit more specification, but would love that list of vintage or auction pieces.
List of vintage or auction pieces. Maybe they're asking about auctions locally, like auction houses. There's Toomey here in Oak Park, which is great. They have a very good 20th century design department. They also do a lot with Stickley and lots of other different types of decor and furniture and area rugs and art and everything you can imagine. I used to work at Wright, which is a 20th century art design auction house around Fulton Market area. Leslie Hinman is another one in Chicago. And those are kind of, I think I would say the top, kind of three majors in Chicago. And they're great for consigning to and buying from. I think the auction world is definitely an underutilized resource for non-billionaires. Certainly, you can spend a lot of money at an auction house, but you can also not. There's a lot of things that, again, just like artwork or anything, and it has a story. And I say that maybe auction things are on your list of items that you might want to hunt for, because there's high probability you won't successfully win said thing, and you're going to have to keep looking. But it's part of the adventure, and I love when you can have pieces in your home that have the story of how you acquired them. So
very cool. I think that might be it for questions.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Melissa.
Thanks to everybody who's listening, and reach out to me if I can answer any questions for you later on.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Sam. You too. Bye.